For somebody consuming a conventional type diet right now, wanting to make the shift to this diet you've been talking about, what does that look like in a practical sense?
In short, in a nutshell, so to speak, it involves basically eliminating sugary and starchy foods from the diet and consuming, and it's okay, fibrous vegetables, in my view, are okay as long as you tolerate them well. They provide We don't have any dietary requirement as a species for fiber or for plant foods at all, actually. We can do without them, and we have done without them for stretches of time throughout our history. But fibrous vegetables and greens do form a substrate for healthy fermentative bacteria in our colons. We don't have a fermentatively based digestive system like ruminants do, but the fibers do provide a fermentative base, as do the connective tissues of animals, by the way, which are actually even more effective that way, to be honest. Um, and they it also provides more dietary diversity. And it's one reason why I have reservations about what people are terming the carnivore diet. It's not that plants are required. It's that it allows for, number one, more interesting meals, to be able to incorporate fibrous vegetables and greens as we are able to tolerate them, which not everyone can. But that diversity also produces a tremendous diversity of our, microbiome, our bacteria. We have most of what makes up humans in terms of living cells isn't even human. You know, we have uh, this whole microbial ecosystem in our bodies that regulate a lot of different things. And the more diverse your diet, the more diverse that microbial composition, and the more diverse that microbial composition, the more resilient and robust your immune function is going to be. And our immune systems are under attack from all sides. And we could do a whole show on just that, on all the different ways in which we're under siege. And so anything that we can do to support that, I think, is a good thing. And again, I like the dietary diversity. I enjoy having a variety of textures and flavors on my plate. Not just the steak topped with a pork chop with a slice of bacon on top, as delightful as that might be. And the other thing is that the dietary diversity in animal source foods is also important. So the nose to tail thing, right? Consuming all parts of an animal that are edible, the organs and tissues, and even glands and things like that, I think, are something certainly that our ancestors did. And unfortunately, here in our particularly American Western kind of paradigm, our culture, a lot of those foods have kind of fallen to the wayside in terms of they've fallen out of favor. People just they they're not drawn to them. They think they're gross, or they're just not accustomed to consuming them. Now, there are obviously countries in Europe that relish those things, but we tend not to. When we think of meat, we think of steak, fish, chicken, blah blah blah, and that's pretty limited in terms of nutrient value and density. Probably the ultimate superfood of all time, certainly better than turmeric or garlic or, whatever else that they're saying is a superfood nowadays. One that puts them all to shame, not even close, in terms of competition, is liver, which contains just an incredible density of nutrients that are so important to the functioning of our immune systems and our brains and all our organs and tissues. So I'm not saying it's a diet that consists of liver, but I mean, it incorporates those things. It incorporates those things in hopefully a palatable way. I have recipes and all that stuff, but Um, and so what I focus on is eliminating sugar and starch to the extent possible, and then moderating protein content. Okay. So this isn't a high protein diet that I'm advocating for here. It's about protein moderation, keeping our protein intake roughly to what we actually require, as opposed to just eating as much as you want, a big steak on your plate or whatever else. And there are reasons for that. And then deriving the majority of your actual calories from the naturally occurring fats present in those protein-based foods. And, cooking and things like, well, I enjoy cooking with duck fat. That to me is just, it's a delicacy. Or tallow or lard, uh, I guess coconut oil. The thing about some of the plant fats that are embraced as being, so healthy and clean, like avocado oil or olive oil, or coconut oil. Well, avocado and olive oil have not as high a smoking point as would be ideal, right? But they also don't have a whole lot else of what your brain or body require to, to fuel everything that your body requires, not just fuel, but supplying the nutrients that are required for the functioning of your immune system. When people think of animal fat, they just think of saturated fat and that's it. But um, even a fat grass-fed steak with a nice layer of fat around it and well marbled is still more than 50% unsaturated fat. It's mostly monounsaturated. There is saturated fat content, and that's good because saturated fats, by their very nature, are intrinsically resistant to oxidation, and they can be helpful in protecting some of the more delicate polyunsaturated fats, like the naturally occurring omega-3s in meat or fish or whatever else. They serve a role in protecting those fats and helping, move them to where they need to be in the body without premature oxidation. So saturated fat's a perfectly wonderful thing, but people forget about the fact that meat also contains just a plethora of other fat-soluble nutrients, depending upon the type of meat you're consuming. But true vitamin A, which is, I think, the most underrated and unsung fat-soluble nutrients, that's just so underappreciated, is only found, true vitamin A, retinol, is found exclusively in foods of animal origin. And obviously, the richest natural source of vitamin A is liver. Your immune system can't function without it. You want a healthy immune system, you want healthy lungs, you want, a healthy skin, healthy all kinds of things. Vitamin A is very, very, very critical to that equation, and it works together in tandem. In my book, Primal Fat Burner, I talked about the three amigos, which are vitamin A, which retinol, vitamin D3, cholecalciferol, which is naturally occurring in, it's actually the richest natural source of dietary D3 in the human diet currently, that's widely available. Well, not widely available, it's hard to find actually, is 100% totally pastured pork. So who knew lard was a health food? But it is. It is a very rich source of naturally occurring vitamin D3. And then vitamin K2, MK4, which is the only form of K2 that we evolved consuming. And one of the things that I get my hackles up over is the fact that the number one source of K2 in supplements now is a form called MK7. And almost all the K2 products on the market right now, and most of the health pundits out there that are peddling supplements or whatever have bought into this. It's almost all MK7 now. There were a group of Dutch researchers that found that they could take genetically modified bacteria and then ferment a soy product called natto and derive this MK7 product. And of course, most soy is genetically modified as well. Soy was never meant to be a primary food source for humans. We did not evolve consuming this. And again, it's largely unnaturally cultured, but it's a form of K2. but it's not the form that the human body recognizes. And so the only form of vitamin K2 that that is found in the human brain, for instance, is MK4. That's the only form of K2 your brain will allow. If you're a pregnant woman, it's the only form, K2 MK4 is the only form of K2 that is allowed to pass through umbilical blood into a fetus. And the body doesn't, the purveyors of, K2 MK7, oh yeah, this is the best form, say, oh, it keeps really high levels in the bloodstream. And well, it keeps high levels in the bloodstream because the body doesn't know what to do with it. So it floats around there. MK4 gets used pretty quickly, and it plays such a variety of roles in our health that it kind of isn't even funny. But one of the key things, of course, because people are popping vitamin D pills like crazy. Well, vitamin D facilitates, among many other things that it does, it facilitates the absorption of calcium, which most people are getting too much of anyway if they're consuming dairy. And God forbid calcium supplements, which nobody should take. But the problem is that without K2, so vitamin K2 plays the role of, vitamin D helps the absorption, but K2 actually helps to direct the calcium to where it needs to be in the body, where it's actually going to do you good. Without the presence of K2 MK4, you're going to be absorbing calcium willy-nilly, and you may very easily end up calcifying things that were never meant to be calcified. Your arteries, your heart, your brain, your joints. And that's a problem. Naturally occurring vitamin K2 MK4 is found in the fat of animals that have eaten nothing but fresh, pasture, fresh, what's natural for them. It's actually a little bit higher in poultry fat, and particularly duck and goose fat. Goose fat especially, and partly because geese they're grazers, they're like deer. They just sort of eat grass and greens all day long. So they get a lot of K1 in that diet, which their bodies very efficiently convert into K2, MK4 for storage. Goose as a food, goose liver pate is probably the richest source you can eat, but it's found in the fat of other grazing animals as well. And it's really important. And I don't know if your viewers are familiar with Weston A. Price, who he was.
I definitely am, and I would assume a lot of them are.
Okay. I don't know if some background is needed, but what he discovered, anyone who's familiar with his work is familiar. He talks about something called Activator X. And Activator X, he didn't know what that was. What he knew was that it showed up really strongly, like in the fats of animals in the springtime and whatever else, where they were eating rapidly growing grass. And so like grass-fed butter and ghee are also very rich sources of K2 MK4. But he, science hadn't really identified what that nutrient was. He identified it as the sort of anomalous nutrient in fat sources, animal fat sources. And he found that people that ate the most of it just had exceptional health. There was something magical about it in his mind. It wasn't until more recently that a Japanese researcher actually identified K2MK4 as the likely candidate for what Weston Price was calling Activator X. And so, yeah, and it's one of those things that almost nobody knows, and it's unfortunate. So there is and I don't have any stake in this company at all, but the richest supplemental source of K2MK4 that is available anywhere. There is a particular strain of emu oil, and the only company that I know that carries it is one called Walkabout Health Products, and they are entirely focused upon this particular strain of emu that is producing the highest levels of K2MK4 anyone's ever seen. And so there's that. Now there are synthetic versions of K2MK4 that one can purchase, but they're synthetic. It's fair to say that most of the research done on the subject was actually done using synthetic K2MK4. So, okay, the the, um the problem I have with it, of course, is like the problem I have with almost any research around a single nutrient is that no nutrient exists in a vacuum, right? They're all designed to kind of work together in concert. They have synergistic effects on one another that cannot be extrapolated from an isolated nutrient evaluation. But the Dutch researchers basically they took all the research around K2, MK4, and they said, well, this is K2 also, so therefore we can extrapolate, right? And so we are therefore offering all the same benefits. And by the way, there are sort of lawsuits pending and all kinds of things around that. I think eventually this will come out, but I urge people to stay away from supplements containing K2, MK7 because we ultimately don't know long term, what those are going to do. But all we do know is that there's actually no basis for it in our evolutionary history. And anyone that says that that can convert, that MK7 converts to MK4 doesn't is trying to sell you something. And the same thing with K1. I've known practitioners who used to just give people K1 and say, well, that'll convert to K2. Well, so like it's sort of like beta carotene. It can be legally called vitamin A, even though it is not true vitamin A. It is provitamin A. It takes 6 to 20 units of beta carotene to form a single unit of actual vitamin A, and that's only in persons who are optimally healthy metabolically. They've got a healthy liver, healthy thyroid, etc. They can make the conversions. Uh, and but even then, you will never meet your actual vitamin A requirements using plant-based sources. It's not possible. Um, and the same thing with omega-3s. People think, okay, omega-3 is omega-3. So linoleic, alpha linoleic acid, from or alpha linolenic acid from, say, blades of grass, and chia seeds and flax seeds and sachinichi oil and whatever else. They are nowhere near the same thing. There is a huge conversion process that needs to go underway. It's an elongation process. And the very first step in that process is an enzyme called delta 6 desaturase. And there is a huge percentage of the population, particularly people of Northern European descent, Celtic descent, in native descent of some kind, who don't have that enzyme at all. So that conversion is a non-starter. Even for people that, number one, have delta 6 desaturase, and number two, are not part of those ethnicities, if they're slugging flax oil all day long, apart from the fact that they're probably putting themselves at risk for a stroke, they are lucky to be able to convert, assuming all their organs and glands are functioning normally, maybe 3% to 5% into EPA, and maybe none at all into DHA. And if DHA is not in your diet, it's not in your brain. So I'm just saying. And we've got a lot of people with brains that aren't working too well nowadays, if you hadn't noticed, which is why I live off grid in the middle of nowhere. So anyway, so these are all, anyone that says, oh yeah, we can convert K1 to K2, we don't really have a basis in our evolutionary development for the requirement of that. Plants have never been a primary source of nourishment for humans. It's always been kind of a side dish when it was available, during certain times of the year, or once we developed cooking, we were able to broaden our consumption of plant-based foods because they contain so many anti-nutrients that cooking will help to neutralize some of that, and also break down the cellulose and make it a little more digestible. But where there may be a lot of nutrients in greens, for instance, and again, I don't have a problem with consuming them if you enjoy them, but we don't have a digestive system that is designed to extract all the nutrition from plants. We don't have a fermentatively based digestive system. We don't have 4 stomachs that are able to convert that plant material into much more nutrient-dense nutrition. And, for instance, you know, fermented vegetables are kind of a popular thing, the raw, fermented kraut and stuff like that. Um, you will have probably 300% more vitamin C in fermented cabbage than the raw cabbage that, you know, that kraut was made from. And that's what a cow's rumen does. That's, what ruminants do. Rabbits have the ability to make better use of those things that way, and again, it's all the bacteria and fermentation throughout their gut. We have a chimp has about 60% of a chimp's gut is dedicated to fermentation, which is why they all look like they have beer guts, and gorillas, and that kinda thing, because it's a big fermentation vat in there, and they are letting the bacteria make, much richer use of the plant material. They're able to ferment into all kinds of nutrients and nutrition that weren't present in the plant when they first consumed it. We don't really have that ability. We have only about 20% of our human digestive system is actually devoted to fermentation. It's our lower GI tract, our colon, and even the um, even the butyric acid and whatever that's produced um, is mainly meant for the health of the colonocytes, the cells that line the colon. Uh, it isn't really supplying us, the rest of us with energy. And it's actually interesting to point out that really all large animals are designed to rely on fat as a primary source of fuel, in a manner of speaking. Like even a cow, um, 70% of its caloric intake of its calories that it uses to fuel itself are not actually coming from carbohydrates that they consume all day long. It's coming from the short chain fatty acids that are a byproduct of the fermentation of the plant fiber, butyric acid and acetic acid and, you know, um, and whatnot. It's primarily butyric acid that that cows and deer and whatever else rely on for energy. But they have to go through this whole process, in order to do that. So we don't have that ability. So we're designed to get our energetic fats directly from the animals that have synthesized them for us. And from there, we're able to utilize free fatty acids and something called ketones, which are water soluble energy units of fat that actually, so fatty acids supply twice the energy of carbohydrate or protein in terms of calories. Ketones can supply 4 times the amount. So it's a super high charged thing. And when you have a large brain, um, roughly 25% of our brain's metabolism, um, or 25% of our calories, I should say, actually go to brain metabolism as adults. It may be up to 85% in an infant, and 50, 60% or whatever in toddlers. So, like, that's a tremendous amount. What we have between our ears has an enormous metabolic demand. And if you're relying on sugar to fuel that, then you're living on what I call metabolic kindling all the time. You can do it, and I heat my house with a wood stove, you know. I live in the mountains and I get real winters here, so and if all I had, was kindling to heat my house, I could certainly heat my house that way, but I'd have the doors to that wood stove open all day long. I'd be sitting in front of it, obsessed with where the next handful of fuel was going to come from to keep it going, to keep the house warm. I'd be crumpling up paper, throwing twigs in there, little tiny, pieces of wood, etc. And it would take up a lot of space and a lot of time and energy in order, and a lot of focus, to keep it going. So what's the alternative? Well, you go out and you find a nice big fat log, right? And you put that on the fire, and suddenly now you're free. You're free to go about your business. You can forget about it, throw it in, and, set it and forget it, as they say. You can go run your errands and go do your chores and whatever else. You can try to sleep through the night. There's an analogy to be made there. You wake up in the morning or you come home later and you peek in the stove. Oh, fire's burning down. Just throw another log on. And there's a tremendous amount of freedom that comes with that, and a lot of also mental clarity that comes with that, that really can't come from something that burns so fast and furious and with such volatility as glucose. Glucose is designed to be our rocket fuel for emergencies. A saber-toothed tiger jumps out from behind a bush and starts chasing you around, or you're being charged by a cantankerous woolly mammoth. Glucose is suddenly going to become a primary fuel to fuel your. It's going to fire your adrenals fire, and when you're under stress, that sends a big glucose surge, and it may allow you to outrun that threat. But do you really need rocket fuel in your car if you're just going to the corner grocery store and you're just going about your daily business? If you're not a professional race car driver, or expecting trouble, um, you know, the vast majority of what we can rely on all day long, that's very even burning and reliable, is our free fatty acids and ketones.
If you enjoyed that clip, you're going to want to head over here and catch a full episode. I'll see you over there.
I do believe in relying on ketones and free fatty acids as a primary source of fuel. I think we're well designed to do that. We've always selectively hunted the fattest, sassiest animals. What we have between our ears has an enormous metabolic demand.